Some years ago in my previous life, before I entered the nonprofit foundation advancing libertarianism world, I was a trial attorney in my native state of Texas, and I was practicing law in Dallas, and I guess I was around 33 or so, and I went to the University of Dallas and I found the head of the economics department and asked him if I could contract with him, hire him, to tutor me in Austrian economics. So he says, well, show me what you've read, and I gave him my reading list, and he says, look, let's do this. Let's start from the beginning. Let's go to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and then we'll go from there. And so we did. We studied Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations chapter by chapter. We went to David Ricardo's Principles, John Stuart Mill, up through the works, The Principles of Economics by Karl Menger, who was the original Austrian economist promoter. And then we were getting to Ludwig von Mises' Human Action, and he says, well, I really like taking your money, but there's a guy coming into the department who's of your age group who knows more about Austrian economics than anybody in your age group. And that was Richard Ebeling. And so he says, I'm now turning you over to him. So I hired Richard to tutor me chapter by chapter in Human Action. We would meet every Friday afternoon, and then we would adjourn for lunch. So it was a great experience. I mean, I really owe to Richard the foundation that I have in Austrian economics. He was teaching at the University of Dallas. From there, he went to Hillsdale College, where he became the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics. I went on to the Foundation for Economic Education, gave up the practice of law in New York. And then 2 years later, I started FFF. And Richard, from the very beginning, was right there helping me put together the foundation. He was the vice president of academic affairs for FFF, wrote a monthly article for our journal, Future of Freedom, for many, many years. And we put on programs like this together. And then one year he got nominated and selected as president of the Foundation for Economic Education, where I'd been serving as program director. And so he remained president of FEE. And then later he went on to the Citadel right here in Charleston. And it's just really, I'm a graduate of Virginia Military Institute, and I wish VMI would move in this direction, but there seems to be little signs of that. But Richard is the BB&T Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Free Enterprise Leadership at the Citadel. He's a through and through libertarian teaching at this institution. He tells me there's other people there that are being hired at the Citadel. It's a real testament to this school that they're opening up the students' minds to this philosophy, both in terms of economics and foreign policy. And Richard is the co-author of many books, or the editor of many books, some of which have been published by FFF. One that we're really proud of is The Failure of America's Foreign Wars, that y'all all get a free copy of. We published that many, many years ago, and it's timeless. It'll apply today. And Richard also authored a book called Monetary Central Planning in the State for FFF that I think you'll love. It's about the Federal Reserve. And then another one most recently, Austrian Economics and Public Policy, along with, I think it's a 6-part video series that explain the fundamentals of the principles of economics. So it's been a real highlight of my life to have Richard Ebeling not only working with us, he's working with us again at FFF. He does a weekly article that we publish. He and I do a weekly internet show, a video show called The Libertarian Angle that I would invite you to listen to or watch. And or subscribe to our FFF Daily, and you get it in there every week. And so it's been a real pleasure to not only to have Richard working with us at FFF and bringing these great ideas to people that are supporting our work and subscribing to our work, but also just our personal friendship. Richard Ebeling.
Not too long ago, a conservative Republican wheeled himself into a bar. He was paralyzed from the waist down. And he wheels himself to a table. The waiter comes up, and he orders a beer. And the beer is brought, and the conservative looks over into the corner of the bar and says, "Isn't that Jesus Christ?" And the waiter, the bartender says, yes, that's Jesus. And the conservative says, well, you send over a beer to him and tell Jesus it's on me. Shortly after that, a libertarian comes into the bar, and he's hobbling on a walker, and his spine is crooked, and he has a hump on his shoulder, and he hobbles over to a table. Bartender, the waiter comes up, let me have a glass of wine. A glass of wine comes, and he too looks in the same corner and says, isn't that Jesus? Yep, bartender says, that's Jesus. Will you send Jesus a glass of wine over and tell him it's from me? Then a modern liberal Democrat comes in. And he has a cast on his leg, and he has a cane, and he gets over to a table, and again the bartender comes, and he orders a shot of whiskey. And the bartender comes back with it, and the liberal Democrat says, isn't that the supposedly supernatural person, sometimes referred to as God Jesus? Yep, that's Jesus. Well, you send over to that maybe supernatural being, Jesus, and give him a shot of whiskey and tell him it's on me. Shortly after that, Jesus gets up and comes up to the conservative Republican, and he says, because of your kindness and thoughtfulness, I touch you and you are healed. And suddenly, whatever the paralysis was from the waist down that was forcing this conservative to be in the wheelchair is gone. And he jumps out of the wheelchair, hallelujah, praise the Lord, and he runs out of the bar. Jesus goes up to the libertarian and says, because of your thoughtfulness and kindness, I touch you and you are healed. And his spine is straightened and the hump is off his shoulder. And the libertarian yells, hallelujah, praise the Lord, as he too runs out of the bar. And then he goes up to the modern liberal Democrat and he says, for your thoughtfulness and kindness, and just before he can finish, the Democrat says, please don't touch me, I'm on government disability. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. It's particularly a pleasure to have been on a program with Ron Paul. Excuse me, I've known Ron Paul actually from about the time when I met Jacob Hornberger in the mid-1980s. I had taken this job at the University of Dallas, and while Ron Paul was a congressman from the Houston district, if you were conservative or libertarian, in spite of its size, Texas was politically kind of a small state. And one story I should mention, since he was talking about some of his experiences in Congress and the attitudes of his colleagues there. Shortly after I met Ron, I said, Ron, when you entered Congress for the first time, what surprised you the most? And Ron thought for a moment and said, the fact that if I made two statements in the well of the Congress, my colleagues either laughed at me or ignored me. And he said the two statements were in relation to any bill coming before the House. It's immoral or it's unconstitutional. Using either one of those arguments, it's immoral or unconstitutional, will result in no one in the rest of the House, or virtually none, taking him seriously. That is the state of American politics for decades now. Now, I cannot have let pass, at least elaborating slightly on Jacob's comments about how we met back in the 1980s. It is true I had taken a job at the University of Dallas, and this was, I had taught a little bit, but this was really like one of my first really full-time regular teaching positions. So I was assigned classes I hadn't normally taught. There's a lot of lesson plan preparation, the syllabus for the class. But he came up to me and he said, I'd like for you to tutor me in Ludwig von Mises's Human Action. I was a little hesitant, the workload. And then he told me the fee he'd pay me. No problem. Now, I'm being paid to perform a service. I want to be conscientious. So I start meticulously going through, again, the chapters in Human Action, making out little outlines for myself. And I would start the sessions, trying to summarize so we could then discuss. About halfway through each session, he would get off Austrian economics, and he'd want to test me. Well, where do you stand on this issue and that issue? How libertarian am I? Do I leak? And so, the bulk of the conversation would be about our political views. And then, as he mentioned, we would then go out, and he usually would treat me to lunch at a local, very good Mexican restaurant. Now, you have no idea how depressed I became when, I guess about a year and a half, 2 years later, he tells me that he is taking this job at the Foundation for Economic Education as program director. He's leaving Dallas. Here I've had this great gig, good pay, no work, and a free lunch. I was so depressed that he was leaving. But Jacob and I obviously have known each other for a very long time, and it is always a pleasure to be continuing to participate with him in programs like this. We do the Libertarian Angle once a week as a YouTube video on the issues of the day. I write a regular article which appears on the website, and that sort of gets to the importance of today's theme, and that is non-intervention. Now, the classical liberal, the libertarian, believes strongly in the principle of non-intervention. But what does this mean? It means that government should not be intervening in the affairs of human beings when it does not involve one private citizen aggressing on the rights of another. Each individual is born, classical liberals, libertarians, conservatives in general, believe that each is born with certain inherent natural rights. Thomas Jefferson spoke about it in the Declaration of Independence, did he not? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the idea is, Jefferson goes on after those famous words, that governments are formed among men to secure and protect those liberties. And that is fundamentally the only purpose, rationale, justification for government. The establishment of an agency over a territory in which it has legitimized authority to use force and compulsion. Only if it is securing our liberties and not violating them can we say that the actions of a government as reflecting the wishes of the people to have their rights secured is justified and should be viewed by the people as legitimate. Now that means in the domestic affairs of a society that each of us is free to live our lives as we peacefully and voluntarily choose, as long as we respect those equivalent rights of others. I choose my own values, my own purposes, my own goals. I decide what are the most important and useful means and methods to try to attain them. Now, no man is an island, and there's very little that we can do in blissful, economic, self-sufficient isolation to attain all the goals, purposes, and ends that we want to attain. So we form social relationships, associations, interactions with others. We call this, in general, the market economy. There's the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. Each of us finds a niche, a corner, a specialization in which to participate in the social system of division of labor in a market economy in which we apply our knowledge, our abilities, our skills that we have intuitively have or acquired to make something that others will take in trade from us in exchange for what they can do either better than us or that we can't do for ourselves at all. And through that voluntary exchange, we mutually benefit each other. That is the basis from a freedom point of view of all human relationships. Personal freedom, secured liberty, and voluntary and peaceful association and interaction with other human beings. It is only when one individual violates the rights of another through violence of murder, theft, fraud, that the government then has a role to come in. The reasons and the rationales and the justifications were explained long ago by the Founding Fathers and before them in the modern version by the famous British philosopher John Locke. But that is the purpose of government, and that is the rationale in the domestic affairs of a nation of non-intervention. It only intervenes in the negative sense, to protect a person's liberty or to secure justice after a person's rights have been violated. Anything else is to take from some that they honestly have earned or acquired, and to take it from them without their consent to redistribute or give to another. And that includes that blatant form of taking from Peter to give to Paul, to the use of the regulatory state, the interventionist intrusion state, such agencies as the Federal Reserve, through the redistribution of wealth through inflation. All of these would be unjustifiable forms of intervention, and therefore the advocate of liberty is for non-intervention in all such affairs. But what about foreign policy? What does it mean when the classical liberal, the libertarian, many conservatives say that they believe in non-intervention in foreign affairs as well? Well, it basically was the principles and the ideas upon which the country was both founded and operated for a good part of its early history. And that is, the attitude is that a government protects the rights of the individual. It doesn't violate them. Now, there can be domestic bandits, thieves, corrupt fraudsters, murderers, and so government secures us domestically from that. And sometimes there can be bandits, thieves, murderers, and conquerors attempting to enter the territory of your country and plunder and enslave and kill and rob you. And just as domestic police are meant to protect negatively your rights from the aggressions of private citizens in that country, the role of the government in the sense of military is to negatively protect you from an invasion, an attack, or a clearly and obvious imminent threat. But if there is no such imminent threat or clear and evident attack, the U.S. government has no business intervening in the affairs of other nations around the world. Why? Well, first of all, it's one thing to say that country X has invaded your country. They've invaded the country. They're threatening or killing the citizens of that country. They're seizing or plundering or destroying the property of the peaceful citizens of that country. Certainly, most people in that country would see the self-evident obviousness and clearness of the government then acting as a national defense agency to repel and resist and oppose such an attack. But once the government goes beyond that and proceeds to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, there's no certainty of such basic unanimity of agreement about what the government is doing and why. The fact is that since the Second World War, the United States has undertaken a variety of foreign interventions, both political, economic, and certainly military. Congressman Paul mentioned some of them: the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. But we've intervened in overthrowing governments, undermining governments, subsidizing opposition groups in other countries. My gosh, we have attempted to influence elections in other countries. I am shocked. I am shocked. Yes. Now, when there is no such unanimity, because it does not involve the protection of the rights of that nation's own citizens, it means a divisiveness among the people. Think of Vietnam, which, again, Dr. Paul mentioned. The Vietnam was virtually divisive from the start. There were many who felt, oh, you know, the communist threat has to be held back. We have to intervene. They talked about dominoes. If Vietnam falls, all of Southeast Asia will fall like a series of dominoes. And we have to show that we mean business. But at the same time, in the United States, there was an extended amount of opposition resistance by people who said, why are we going there? Why are we conscripting, that's just forcefully imposing military service upon tens of thousands of Americans and sending them over to participate and fight a war which many of those people did not either agree with or understand, or didn't even have a clue as to what value or gain would come from it? There were demonstrations, there was violence on campuses, on the streets of America. In fact, that was the worst divisiveness in the country since the Civil War of exactly 100 years earlier. There's also the fact that the American military forces were put into harm's way in ways that could not be justified if one believed in those principles of liberty, to say that you were directly protecting and securing the rights of American citizens from a foreign attack. That was 10,000 miles away on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. And then there was the fact of What was the result of it? Is this what the people of that country wanted? Now, there were certainly people in Vietnam who opposed Ho Chi Minh's regime in the north. But the fact there were many Vietnamese who just didn't want any form of foreign intervention. The French had been a colonial power there from the 1880s until 1954 and had acted very brutally and callously during its colonial years. The United States then came in when the French withdrew and then gave military and political and economic support to South Vietnam and seemed to be just another colonial intervener for its own global purposes. So there's the divisiveness of it, the cost of it. All of these raise questions and doubts as to the purpose of it. Now, if a classical liberal, libertarian, some conservatives take this view, the response many times, and not just from the very hawkish neoconservatives, but many well-intentioned and reasonable conservatives as well, are there not bad things going on in the world around us? Yes, there are. Are there not tyrants and dictators and brutal rulers who do awful things to their own peoples in the name of maintaining their own power and plundering their own country? Absolutely. Are there situations where country X is threatening country Y, and country Y may seem to be the victim and the innocent subject or nation in this instance? Absolutely. Don't you care about helping people abroad who are suffering from liberty when you say you believe in liberty? Aren't you concerned with thwarting the aggression of a bad country against an innocent people in a neighboring land from that aggressor? Yes. But that does not involve the government. Now, the analogy that I sometimes make is that what is it when we see bad things happening in our own society? What is the classical liberal, libertarian, or conservative position usually? It is not that the government should redistribute wealth. It is not that the government should try to socially determine how people act and live. It is not that government should regulate the society. In a free society, if there are others in that society who you see following bad, harmful, or negative paths in their own lives, then the freedom principle says that you have the following ways to influence and try to assist them: reason, persuasion, the example of your own life, of a better path to follow, and to form charitable associations, philanthropic groups, when the financial cost and the just time and effort may involve more than what one person or one or two people can do in outreach to assist those that they may feel have fallen about hard times, have made bad choices, need a second chance and a helping hand. But it is inappropriate in a free society for the state, the political authority, the government, to play the moral arbiter of how and in what form some in society should give assistance to others. First of all, to do so undermines the principle of ethics. If the government taxes us, regulates us to live morally, righteously, better, then what happens to our ability to exercise and develop our own moral conscience? Not only our moral conscience of making the decisions in our own lives to live a different way or not, but charity itself. It is uncharitable, it is undermining the philanthropic spirit when the government takes your money compulsorily from your pocket and gives it to another in the name of assisting them. It desensitizes us. It makes us callous. I paid my taxes. It's not my problem. The government should be providing that health care. The government should be taking care of the old. The government should be. The government should be. It undermines our own sense of moral responsibility in the most reasonable and ethical and right way in a free society that should fall upon and work on the conscience of a free person, what we call the associations of mutual assistance of civil society. It also involves the usurpation of people's wealth, because it really isn't the taking of Peter's wealth to give to Paul. It's taking Peter's wealth and redistributing it to politicians and bureaucrats with political authority, and them then deciding how the money will be spent. On what? what is a good cause? What is a just cause? What is a better cause? With the underlying result being is that then you have politicized the determination of how wealth shall be used, rather than free individuals having control over their own income that they have peacefully and honestly earned. Now, I would argue that the same things, the same underlying principles, if what I've said has any validity or truthful ethical sense to it, in foreign affairs. If bad things happen in other countries, but it does not involve an attack on the United States and therefore a justifiable national defense against an aggressor, then it falls upon the private choices and actions of the American citizens to decide what their conscience leads them to do. It could be to go and personally assist in a cause in another country, to join and participate in a resistance movement against some other nation's domestic dictator, or to thwart an invasion by another country in that foreign land, to volunteer yourself, to do so for free or for pay, to give charitably to support philanthropic efforts, whether it be medical supplies or helping refugees, or even to contribute private money to help armaments for those who you view as threatened and oppressed. If that sounds awkward or strange, with the recent conflicts in the Middle East, particularly involving Islamic State, a big brouhaha was made by sympathizers of Islamic State leaving Europe or the United States clandestinely because their governments said it was illegal, and going to Iraq and Syria and joining the Islamic State. The Islamic State was theological totalitarianism, an imposition on the mind and the body of a narrow and dogmatic conception of religious faith, belief, and conduct. But that was their choice. But what was not given as much public notice in the press, though there were a handful of articles about it, were the admittedly smaller number of Europeans and Americans who went to fight against the Islamic State with the resisting forces in Iraq and particularly Syria. Americans, Brits, a handful of French and Germans. That was their right too, to voluntarily as private citizens to go and oppose Islamic State. And to my mind, the U.S. government should in no way hinder or prevent or restrict individuals from leaving the territorial jurisdiction of the United States and as private citizens, with all the risks that involved as a private citizen, to do so, whether they supported or opposed the cause. We've seen this before. Some of you remember from history the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939. There was a left-of-center Republican government in Spain in 1936. There arose a military rebellion against it, led by a general named Francisco Franco. He labeled himself a fascist. He gained the diplomatic and even military support of Mussolini's fascist Italy and Hitler's Nazi Germany. Italian soldiers came to fight for Franco. German airplanes fought for Franco. But people felt a moral calling. And admittedly, most of them who went to fight the fascists in Spain as private citizens were on the left. They were socialists and some communists. But that's their ideology, and they're going as a private citizen. And they formed the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and the George Washington Brigade, and thousands of them came from the United States and fought against the fascists in Spain as private citizens. Many of them died. I'm sure most of you are familiar with George Orwell, who wrote the famous, futuristic anti-hero novel, 1984. He also wrote a book called Homage to Catalonia. He was a correspondent. He went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and he witnessed this. And he wrote against both the contemptible brutality of Franco and the fascists, but also the contemptible and totalitarian actions of the communists as well on the other side. But what he brought out is that the Americans who were there, even though he ideologically did not agree with him, Orwell was sort of like a middle-of-the-road socialist, not a communist. But he said they were there by their own choice, however naively, given how Stalin's secret agents treated them, who were supporting the anti-fascists. But you see, the important thing here is that these were private individuals acting on their conscience, going back earlier. Inspired by the American movement for independence, in the 1820s there emerged the freedom revolutions in South America against Spanish rule. We all maybe have heard of Simón Bolívar, who led these revolutions in various parts of Latin America to overthrow Spanish rule. Well, there were a handful of Americans, private citizens, who went to fight with Simón Bolívar against Spanish colonialism in Latin America. Why? Some of them were adventures, the excitement of it. Others were idealism, overthrow an imperial power, let the people of Latin America be free societies and hopefully be democratic like we're trying to have in the United States. And some were mercenaries, some of them actually did it for money. And though I've not seen it, I've read that there are, in fact, in some places in Latin America, statues to some of these Americans who actually fought with Simón Bolívar as recognition for their private individual assistance in the cause of their national freedoms. That is the policy and perspective that should be the hallmark of the United States and what the government should not do and the free citizens of the country should and be allowed to do. What is moral and ethical about this? You feel a calling to support some side in a foreign civil war or just a war between the countries, you do so. But that does not mean that you can force, and you're not forcing, the rest of the citizens of the country of the United States to fund fighting for your supported cause or sending American soldiers to support the cause that you support. Let me give one instance that is a volatile one and has been for decades, the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, we have significant communities in the United States of Americans who are of the Jewish faith, and we have Arabs, Muslims, who have lived in the United States, who are American citizens. Some take these issues seriously. There are Americans of the Jewish faith and American Muslims who feel strongly about the Israeli cause or the Palestinian cause. The United States government gives $3 billion a year in foreign aid to Israel. A lot of Arab Americans resent this. It's partly their tax dollars, is it not? Why should their tax dollars go to support Israel? On the other hand, there are some Jewish Americans who are equally resentment. Why do we give $3 billion to Egypt? Which we do through foreign aid and military assistance, and a variety of other Arab countries, all of whom, either in the past or even up to the present, have called, either officially or unofficially, for the destruction of Israel. Why should they have to fund foreign aid of an economic or military type to these Arab countries who have declared a death wish on Israel? If a private citizen who, by choice or accident of birth, is either Muslim or Jewish, you give your own private money. But it should not be the responsibility of the government to take the wealth of all of us and divvy it out to foreign governments to support causes that various groups of the United States population may disagree with. Another example is Turkey is part of NATO, and we have been giving military assistance for many years. Well, there is a sizable Armenian community in the United States, okay? And there are some Kurds who live in the United States. The Armenians were slaughtered by the Turks early on in the 20th century. The Turks have always denied the right of Armenian self-determination in the Armenian part of eastern Turkey. And the Turkish government has brutally oppressed all attempts for national freedom by the Kurds. They're doing it right now. They have intervened into the territory of Syria to try to crush the Kurdish military that has been very successful in fighting against Islamic State, because they think that's a symbol of the right of Kurdish national self-determination. If you're a Kurd or an Armenian who happens to be an American, having been born there, is this your family heritage, and you disagree with Turkish policy, why should your tax dollars have to support the Turkish government? Why should American military personnel through NATO, in principle, be obligated to come to the defense of a Turkish government if you feel strongly against the policies of that Turkish government? That is a radical non-intervention foreign policy that should be the hallmark of the United States. Are there threats? In principle, should there be a military and a national defense against real aggressors who might threaten the United States? Yes, of course. And the size of the military should be commensurate with the real and objective threats against the territorial integrity and the lives and property of the citizenry, which has objectively little to do with the size, scope, and cost of what the United States government spends today on the defense budget and military bases and the stationing of tens of thousands of soldiers all around the world, as if they're garrisoning an American empire. The true philosophy of freedom applied to foreign policy is defense for the protection of the territory and the rights of American citizens, and all other matters are the private choices and decisions of the citizenry to be guided by their conscience to either support causes of their own choice in various and sundry ways, but not to draw all of the people in to support a cause that you may think is right and just, but other Americans do not. Any more than it is right domestically that because you think this is a good cause, other Americans should be taxed and have their wealth redistributed by the compulsion of the state to support a program or an activity or a group that you consider to be deserving. It should all be based upon voluntary giving, freedom of choice, mutual agreement, individual decision-making, and the respect of the rights of others. That should be the policy at home and the policy abroad. Thank you very much.